Bandwidth for changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode cloud servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. This episode is brought to you by Rollbar. Move fast and fix things. Resolve errors in minutes and deploy with confidence. Head to rollbar.com/changelog. Request a demo. Get started today. It's loved by developers, trusted by enterprises, and most of all, we use it here at changelog. Move fast and fix things with Rollbar. Once again, rollbar.com/changelog.
Welcome to JS Party, a community celebration of JavaScript and the web. On this episode, you'll be joining Nick Nisi live on stage at Node.JS Interactive. Nick has 6 awesome guests with him. Topics include Node's loader hooks, worker threads, Probot, robots and automation, and transforming a country through code. Let's do it. Hoi hoi, Nick.
Ahoy, hoy.
At Node.js Interactive, the talks are all quite attractive. From transpilation dread to awesome worker threads, this conf is surely impacted. Thank you. So in this, we're going to get started, and we're just going to talk to some of the speakers that you've heard throughout today and yesterday, and we're going to talk about their talks and dig a little deeper, ask some other questions, and really get more out of them and more out of their content. And so let's get started, and let's interview our first guest, and that is Vladimir Deturkin. You want to come on up?
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So you gave a talk yesterday, and it was called, it was on Node.js loader hooks.
Yeah, that's right.
Tell me about that.
So Node.js loader hook is an experimental API in Node.js. It's linked with ES6 modules, so it's the future and everyone loves that, I guess. Basically, it's an API that enables you to hook any module that is loaded, and then you can do whatever you want, from logging to actually creating virtual module and load them. Mm-hmm. Because it doesn't hook existing modules that are loaded. It hooks modules that are asked to be loaded. So let's say you are loading a module that is not present in your Node modules, you could dynamically create it virtually from a hook. It's just mad science.
That is really cool. And this is actually something that I hadn't heard about until seeing your talk yesterday. So why were loader hooks created? What's the problem that they're trying to solve?
So that's a great question. There are a few reasons why you won't want to know which modules are loaded. I was not part of the working group who designed this API, so I can't give a definitive answer on why they created it.
Sure.
What I can say is that, so at Screen, I do instrumentation of Node.js processes for security. Meaning that I need to know which modules are loaded because I need to inject security algorithms in these modules as they are loaded. And that's a similar issue that APMs have as New Relic, Elastic, or Dynatrace. So all these vendors, we need to know which modules are loaded because we need to know what we need to instrument. Mm-hmm. Usually, historically, we use a very ugly patch by monkey patching some private method in Node, which which technically is not private anymore because half of the ecosystem relies on that anymore now. But I see TSC member looking at me with anger, so they created a proper API for us to do that without breaking everything.
Nice, very cool. So it's to understand what's in the cache is kind of the big.
So it's even before what's in the cache. It's when the modules are loaded, mm-hmm. you have the opportunity to intercept that and even rewrite the module. So in the talk yesterday, I had 3 examples. One of them was actually rewriting loading TypeScript modules. Mm-hmm. So if you create a loader hook that transpiles TypeScript to JavaScript, you could virtually tell Node, hey, this is how to do with TypeScript. And it will not run TypeScript natively because nobody does that. But it will run TypeScript transparently, meaning that you would not have any single file of JavaScript in your code except the module. And Node will know how to do TypeScript because you would have teach it how to do that. After the talk, someone told me about having a YAML loader because there's a lot of things you can do in YAML that you can't do in JSON, but that are still possible in JavaScript objects. Okay. So the idea would be like, hey, I want to import YAML modules transparently without having to read the file and transpile that. I want my developers to just import YAML's module, and that's pretty much what this API can do.
Interesting. So do you see that as being something that developers use like in their actual production apps? Like for that example, like could that be, I know that it's experimental now, but is the end goal to be like a really stable API that you can use to do things like that?
So it will be used in production, at least for APMs, because eventually it will be the only way to intercept loaded modules. So that's definitely a business need for APMs. Regarding transformations, yes, I mean, the TypeScript transformation, I would recommend having a build step. Mm-hmm. But if you want to load other things like YAML, this is a great example, I don't see any reason why you would not use that in production when it's stable. The only potential issue in the future is that how do you compose multiple loader hooks? Mm-hmm. And we know that the JavaScript ecosystem is really strong on having entropy and diverse things in the ecosystem. So I hope there will be soon a standard for people to play along and not to step in each other's feet when loading modules.
Very cool. So you can only use one loader at a time, is that right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Another example that you gave in your talk yesterday was mocking or stubbing modules by changing them, and you were using a proxy. Do you want to describe that a little bit for our listeners?
Yeah, it was a pretty complex use case. So the idea is that, as I told, you can rewrite the modules dynamically as they are loaded. Mm-hmm. So in my example, which is a proof of concept, please don't use that, even if it's on GitHub, so I guess it's public domain. In this example, what I do is that when a module is loaded, I check everything that is exported because it's just an array of string with the name of the things that are exported. And I replace all of the exports by a proxy, which is a native object in JavaScript that enables you to trap everything that happens on an object. So I replace each of these exports by a proxy, and I expose the proxy handler, the definition of how the proxy behaves to the end user. Meaning that when you load the module that has been transformed, you also have access to a set of objects that enables you to change the behavior of all of the exports. So, of course, to make it smarter, we need to bet recursivity on that to change deeper fields. But the first level thing is good enough. Basically, instead of changing your code to make it easier to test, you would just need to load your code, and then in your test file, you will be able to mock by changing the proxies and the behavior of the code, but only for your test file, not for the whole world.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you would not necessarily have to write like code that injects the dependencies.
Yeah.
You could just have it through the loader inject the hook, or the handler for the proxy, and then change things on the fly and change them back afterwards.
Exactly. Over the few last years, I've been seen so many people reinventing the wheel for dependency injection in Node. I won't troll any annotation heavy framework on that, but that's the thing. Stop reinventing the wheel and creating 1,000 of projects where we can have one single, or at least cleaner way of doing that does not require your code to have unstandard module loading. Because that's the main issue I have with all of this alternative dependency injections thing, is that they reinvent the way you load modules, meaning that, I'm still a vendor, I still do Node.js instrumentation, and if you do weird things, that gives me more work to instrument it, and I'm lazy.
The best developers are. So the like one thing that we rely on right now, like I write TypeScript full time, and I use ES module like syntax. Yeah, I use ES module like syntax in TypeScript, and then I rely on tools like Jest. And I haven't looked at what Jest is actually doing, but it has the ability to mock your dependencies like this, which I assume is just relying on the fact that it's just an underlying CommonJS module that's actually being run and being able to do that. So do you see loader hooks as like the solution for those types of problems in the future when theoretically we're all just writing straight ESM?
Definitely. Also, in my understanding, loader hooks will also be available for CommonJS, closing parentheses. But actually, there will be no other solution to hook into things that are imported through ES6 modules. So people will have to go with that. And sometimes it's good to have a unique way of doing that. But this API has been done cleanly. Historically, you can only mock modules synchronously. This API is based on async functions, meaning that you can do async treatment when you mock the modules. It will be incredibly powerful. And I think my talk is just an opening on a few possibilities you can do with that, but I'm really excited to see what people will build around that.
Yeah, definitely. So that really opens up things like, what was one example? You were fetching something, right?
Yeah, it's I think it's the equivalent of Yarn plug and play or the Go module loading system where you don't have the package.json. Disclaimer, I love package.json. I just love to do weird stuff too on my free time. So basically you would be loading modules from a URL because it's just plain text at the end of the day or bytes. And if you have a stream byte that Node.js knows how to instrument it, whether it's JavaScript or WebAssembly, you just need to find a way to get it locally on your machine and to give that to Node.js to build a module for. So yeah, one of my examples was like instantiating a GIST without downloading it before starting the process, letting Node download the GIST for me and instantiate it. This opens the door to a lot of and thousands of security concerns. That's why it was just one example written over. And I think if you want to go that way, you need to have a couple people full time to figure out the security impact of such things.
Yeah, we don't need to worry about that. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Security is not a big deal, is it? Someone just say no.
So that's really cool. And I see this API as being like one of those APIs. I'm thinking back to Miles's keynote yesterday, where he was talking about, I think he called it the existential dread of transpilation or something along those lines, where like we are using transpilation and we're using like CommonJS and all of this, and like there are a lot of things that CommonJS can do or can be abused to do that ES modules really can't because of the way that they're statically analyzed and things like that. And this seems like one of those APIs that is allowing us to have, not really have to take away a lot of features when we go to that. So we can do things like that, kind of get in the middle of how modules are actually loaded and change that in really interesting ways. Another way is like I think it was called module attributes, where you can, you might be able to load JSON in the future with ES modules, for example.
So yeah, actually someone came to me after the talk and asked, hey, would it be possible to ES6 import CommonJS module with a loader hook? And that's actually doable because there's a method in Node named create require that enables you to create a custom require function that you can use in ES6 modules to load CommonJS modules. So you could definitely build a loader that would do that. Actually, in my TypeScript example, to import a TypeScript transpiler, I had to do that because it's not exposed as an ES6 module, so I had to load it as a CommonJS module. And that's, if you want to create backward compatibility with CommonJS through a loader, you can. The entropy of weird things that will be available with this API is limitless, and that's one of the things I love with the Node.js and JavaScript at large ecosystem, is that it's just infinite state machine where you just give a few rules. It's an AI, it's a collective AI. You give a few rules and the pool of developers around the world will hack around it until everything is hacked around.
Absolutely. So kind of as a closing question, what's one thing that you want developers to take away about loader hooks?
That's a good question. I'm really unprepared for that one. I guess the thing is, Node.js can be turned into a universal runtime. And I could make a pun on saying it's the Graal of runtimes, referencing Graal VM, which is an amazing product in development by Oracle, which aims at running all languages over the JVM. And we have a chance of doing something similar in Node.js, because through loader hooks, you can load anything. And when I mean anything, it's anything that Node.js can understand eventually, including loading Rust code and having it compiled to WebAssembly on the fly. So, or even C or C++ code. As long as it can run either in WebAssembly or in JavaScript, you can run that on V8. And as long as you can do that, you can do a loader hook to transparently get that into V8. So yeah, hack around and bring every language of the world to Node.js so we can finally achieve world domination as it was the plan all along.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Vlad, for talking to us. Yeah, thank you. All right. How's everyone feeling? Good. I'm very excited for our next guest to come on, and that is Marian Villa. Would you please come up to the stage? Let's have a round of applause for her.
On?
Yep.
Okay.
Welcome, Marian.
Thank you, Nick.
So tell us a little bit about your talk, and the title of that talk was Transforming a Country Through Code.
So, yeah, today we are sharing about our work in Pioneers Dev. Pioneers Dev is a non-profit organization, an NGO from Colombia. And in my talk, I was sharing about when you think about Colombia, South America, first you don't know how to pronounce it if you are from out of Colombia. So it's Colombia, not Columbia, as the university is very different.
I admit that I was taking notes and I totally spelled it wrong, and then you corrected me, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's different. So, and the other thing is, I know we have a really strong story about war and about the internal guerrilla problem, and I know you saw Narcos, of course, and Netflix is a pretty primetime show, but that's not the reality in our country. So we create a small group with 5 girls in 2015, and we start from there, and right now we are circa 1,200 young women who are learning how to code.
That's just crazy, the growth on that. That's great. Can you tell us what Pioneers, is it Pioneer? Am I saying that right? Pioneers Dev. Can you tell us what that looks like? Like what you do with that, and what is like the typical story of a young woman who goes through that program? What does it look like?
Okay, so we realized that it becomes like a study group of 5 enthusiastic girls. I was one of them. But then we realized that the 85% of our group that starts small they have lower income, so they can afford to take a ticket to go to our innovation hub, Rutaine in Medellin. So the first successful story was Milady. Milady is a typical girl from the Comunas. Comunas is the poorest area of our city. And she can afford to go to university or to get a job because she doesn't know how to work in a qualified work, on the streets. So she goes to Pioneras, and we only create a meetup, but this meetup really changed her life. So it was like 10 meetups that year. It was like 2016. And at the end of the year, she could get her first job in Techville. So it was awesome.
That's so awesome. What kind of technology does the group focus on?
So our core was Node because we have a really cool mentors that are here in this conference, and they are really great from the tech culture in Colombia because they create the first conference in our country that was JSConf. I was co-organizer in 2018 and 2017, and I'm very close to this community. And actually, most of them. I know Node is backend, but most of them has really strong roots in the JavaScript language, and most of them are front-end developers, but we have really cool girls and really smart girls doing Node in Colombia.
Very cool. So that's like the way that you get into the program. You kind of start off with no skills in programming at all.
Zero. They actually. Most of them don't have a computer, so we have a special room in Ruta N with really cool PC laptops, and they get in touch with the technology through this space because they don't have it in their homes. Mm-hmm. So that's from zero, actually.
And this is, and so they go from that, and how long does it is the typical program?
It's 1 year, but I actually specified that. I mean, they learn how to search and how to search in Stack Overflow and GitHub and how to they self-learn in other space like libraries or small study groups, and they can share one laptop per five young women. Mm-hmm. But with mentorship, because we also have a mentorship program, through a year they can get the job.
Very cool. So this was started in 2015, you said, in your city, right? And that's Medellin, yep. And it has expanded beyond that, right?
Yes, right now we are in 3 main cities in Colombia: Cali, Barranquilla, and Medellin. Medellin actually right now is we have a really big tech hub right there. But in other cities, that's no story because they don't have too many companies in there, or actually it's not trendy for companies to be there, or don't have the spaces to run the meetups. So we are really helping through Medellin to reach other areas from Colombia that they don't have too many opportunities.
And what kind of support do you get, like from the local businesses, or from the city, or from the country? Like, what kind of support is there for you?
Actually, there are 3 things we need. We need someone to want to share their knowledge. Mm-hmm. So if you feel like you can share with us, pioneers, you can write us or follow us in our social media, and you are able to share with one pionera in Colombia or in other 3 cities that we are right now. The other thing is venue, because we need a place to run these meetups, and the co-working, so innovation hubs will be very open to us. In cities like Cali, or another ones that we like to open is Cartagena, for example. And Cartagena was really difficult to find a place, but perhaps through universities we can reach them for 2020. And the third thing will be food, because we like to share with them some snacks, but will be really low. We need cookies and coffee. That's it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. How does is there any other like type of funding that happens for that?
Yeah, we create a Shopify, like we put these t-shirts that cost like $15. Mm-hmm. It's in pesos, that people see that and it's like 35K, and they say like, oh my God, it's so much. But the TRM, the conversion will be $15. It could be less, but you can buy a t-shirt, and perhaps we could send it out of Colombia right now, but you are supporting our cause.
And has the group has it expanded outside of Colombia?
Yes, actually, I know in Latin America there are a few groups about girls in coding areas, but there are some places like Bolivia or Peru. Peru also have, but I mean Bolivia, Ecuador, and they have a space for something like pioneras. But we are creating a change one community at a time. So open a meetup in other cities because we have 32 departamentos, and departamentos will be like bureaus or something like that in demographical political divisions. But we have really jungle or really poor areas that they don't have developed like the big cities that we are right now. So we like to expand to the rural areas and perhaps create a bigger impact in our country first.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's so cool, and it's such a great thing. And you truly are transforming a country, just as your title states, which is really cool. How can we help with that?
No, just only write us an email and give us ideas how you could support us, and I'm sure we can figure it out.
Yeah, and is that through like helping with like teaching and things like that?
Yeah. See, we need people to share knowledge, and right now I know we always know something to share, but perhaps you are always apprentice in life. But this group really need knowledge and time. Time is the most valuable currency that you already have. So if you have the time to share 1 hour with these women, young women in Colombia, will be great. Perhaps we need to improve our English skills because they are really smart, but they need to pass the barrier of the language, and we need to practice our skills. So perhaps will be tech English skills, I don't know.
Very good. And was there anything that you didn't mention in your talk that you want to get out to everyone?
The message that I like to share with all of you, is please help us to transform our country. Help us with your time and with your knowledge, because I know here will be the brightest mind to share about Node and about JavaScript world. So we need them. We need to change these young women lives. Thank you.
Love it. Love what you're doing. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you for talking with us.
This episode is brought to you by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean provides worry-free database hosting with their managed databases. If you need to get data in and out of Postgres, MySQL, or Redis, call on the world-class support teams at DigitalOcean and stop wasting time on setup, backup, and maintenance. Get simple, predictable pricing. Get detailed documentation. Get up and running in minutes so you can get on with your business. What are you waiting for? Head to do.co/changelog. Again, that's do.co/changelog.
All right. Next up, we have Chris Wilcox and Jason Ekovich. So please welcome them to the stage. All right, welcome. So, Chris, you are an engineer at Google, and your talk yesterday was, oh no, the robots are taking over, I think?
Yeah, so I gave a talk about how we use bots and automation for the Google Cloud Client libraries to try to make our job a little bit easier and a little less repo garden-y.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your talk, you mentioned using Probot. And so, Jason, you're the maintainer of Probot. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So one thing that I thought was pretty cool in your talk was you gave an example of, or you gave a list of the 5 levels of automation, and I just wanted to go over those real quick and then talk about them. And they were automating portions of your workflow is step 1. Automating the discovery and work, but under supervision would be step 2. Letting the robot do the work for you, but with supervision would be step 3. And then doing the work, unsupervised, and pulling out the fallback support would be step 4, and then the robot is your boss is step 5. And so you mentioned that we probably will never get to step 5, and we wouldn't want to, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah, it's probably not that surprising as someone that works in technology, but I watch some science fiction, and generally that goes poorly, right? Anyone that's seen HAL knows that when we take technology to that point, it gets mean-spirited and causes us more pain than good.
Yeah, for sure. What could possibly go wrong? So tell us about a problem that you're using robots to solve.
So we use robots for a lot of different things on Google Cloud. The example I used in the talk was about being able to run CI for things that are initiated by non-contributors. So many people in the community use dependency monitors, so things like Renovate. And those aren't first-class members of a repository. They don't have write access. But we don't really want to have developers having to screen repositories. And for most developers, this probably isn't a huge problem. But at Google, we have hundreds of repositories. And so having to go over each and every one just to initiate CI, to build and test the dependency update is very painful. So we can save literally hundreds of hours of developer time by using bots to do that work. And we do it, bots also for release management, publishing, docs monitoring. And we even take it not quite to step 5, but we have some robots that do bot monitoring. So for instance, our publishing flow to NPM is multi-step. The first step is that we build CI and we tag things on the GitHub side. But there's a step after that will publish to NPM. And if for some reason in between those two, it doesn't get all the way to the end, the bot comes through, it notices, and it opens a bug for us. That sort of ties back into the talk. It's good to scope your bots. So while it's monitoring, it is a very simple task. The worst thing it can do is open bugs against a repo. We have some safeguards so it doesn't try to open a lot of bugs. But yeah.
Yeah, what could go wrong? So you have bots watching the bots?
Yeah, and the last bot in the chain is never really monitored, which is sort of problematic. But knock on wood, nothing terrible has happened yet. So these bots that you're building to watch and tag issues and such, you're using Probot for that. So Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about Probot?
Sure, I can do that. Before I do, though, I have this really funny story that I want to share about bots watching bots. There was this tweet thread, and there was this tweet where an open source project had a pull request that was CI was run by a bot. It was then approved by a different bot. It was then deployed by a different bot, and then a different bot came along and said, "Hey, congratulations, everybody, great job." So, who watches the bots except when they're kind of doing their own thing? It's kind of dangerous.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was this sort of weird thing where bots were interacting with each other. Yeah. It was awesome and terrifying. So Probot is, the sort of tagline on the website is, it's a framework for building GitHub apps. So GitHub apps are a way to integrate with GitHub. Probot is very webhook focused. So, something happens on GitHub, your Probot app will be set up to receive a webhook. And then it has all kinds of helper APIs to say, okay, this happened on GitHub, now here's how we're going to handle it. So, very common example would be somebody pushes code, we want to run CI. Most CI providers will sort of have that built in, but if you wanted to build that through Probot, that's how you would sort of frame it.
Nice. So that sounds very similar to how actions work, from my understanding. They're responding to actions on a repository that might be essentially hooks.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so Probot does predate actions.
Yep.
And so when actions was coming along, the other Probot maintainers and I, we sort of looked at it and said, wow, this is awesome. This is great. This covers so many pain points that Probot has. So deploying Probot is just a framework. It's a Node.js framework. Under the hood, it's running an Express server. So where do you deploy that? But with GitHub Actions, all of a sudden, GitHub runs your workflow automation tools, which is really exciting.
Nice. That's really cool. So yeah, it's that was one takeaway that I took from your talk is that Probot really, or the apps that you create, the bots that you create are really just Node apps, and then you can put them under version control and keep them there. It sounds like you could do pretty much the same thing with GitHub Actions, where they're just under version control in your repository itself.
Yeah. I mean, there are definitely a few things that, if I were to build a workflow automation tool, sometimes I'll use GitHub Actions, sometimes I'll use Probot. I'd say that, for things like persistence or long-running tasks, if, you care if the server suddenly dies, Probot's probably a better option. But if you think to yourself, hey, I'm going to run this app in like a Lambda function, Actions might be a really, really great place to do that.
Nice. So tell me, like, are there things that Actions solve that Probot doesn't, or vice versa?
Yeah, so one of the I have two things that I want to mention. So I think the most exciting one to me is in GitHub Actions, you can really, really easily clone down the repository that the action is taking actions against. So you'll push some code and you want to run like some kind of test coverage tool or something. In Probot, you'd have to like download a whole Git object thing, which in Node isn't very fun to do. But in Actions, you can add one line to a YAML file, and suddenly you have all that code available to you. So that's really exciting. That sort of enables a whole slew of new things. And then another one, and this is something that in the Probot community we saw as being like a really important addition that we wanted to see in the platform itself, is some concept of secrets. So in a repository, you want to configure some API tokens to deal with other things, like maybe you're pushing to SendGrid or some other service, right? There's not really a built-in way to do that in a repository, but with Actions, you can include these things called secrets, and you can include those in your action runs, and it sort of just works super well.
Nice. That's really cool. So there's a lot that you can do with that, with either Probot or Actions. Chris, what is the most complex thing that you have a bot doing?
So typically, you don't want bots to be complex.
Yeah.
So complex bots fail in complex ways, and that tends to get sort of hairy. I would say the neatest thing we probably do, though, not that it's that complex, we find that, especially with so many repositories, issues go stale. Either it gets assigned to a developer, and that developer gets overburdened or goes on leave, or it's just not their area of expertise. They were misassigned. So it just falls to the bottom of their stack and the stuff they do. And if we detect that, we'll pick someone else on the team to randomly assign it to. It's an issue juggler, essentially. And that tends to stop things from just getting stale and makes it look like we're a little more active and we can be a little more responsive to customers.
Nice.
The actually most complex thing we do is probably publishing, just because there's a lot of steps.
Sure.
Individually, it's all very simple, but we have to publish docs and as well as the samples itself, the samples for the repository and the package, the npm package. We use TypeScript, so that needs to be transpiled. None of it's too complicated, but all the pieces do need to fall together.
And for that example, what level of automation would you say that falls under?
At this point, it's up to I would say it's 3 or 4. So the levels are a bit fluid, if you notice from the talk. They're based on something to do in automotive engineering to sort of do driverless car leveling and understanding. So it's just really a way to frame sort of risk and reward, honestly, more than anything else. But it's about a level, probably a 3, maybe a 4 at this point. The thing that made the change for us is we go as far now to auto-detect if we auto-publish. And so as commits come into the main branch, we can detect that there are new changes. And we use a thing called conventional commits. So at the front of every commit is a label, be that chore, fix, breaking, that allows us to detect, is it a patch, a minor, or a major release? We can auto-generate change logs. And from that, really the only thing you do as a developer on the team at this point is merge the PR. And everything else is done for you. So we still control whether or not we published NPM,
sure,
but the rest is fully automated.
Nice. So that must save a lot of time.
It's really nice. I don't want to go back.
Yeah. So going back to that example that shuffles issues that are getting stale, I haven't looked at the APIs closely, but like, is there an action for that, or a webhook for that, or like, are you doing it like, is it proactively searching for that and running like on a cron job or something? How is that being kicked off?
So we have cron bots. So yeah, that's how this is done, and that's something we extended ourselves with using a thing called Cloud Scheduler that Google Cloud can provide us. So we kick off that action, but already. Probot uses a thing called OctaKit that gives you access to a ton of different GitHub events. And there's far more than I would have originally thought. It's definitely something worth checking out. But you can trigger on all sorts of things, and it's very fine-grained, down to pull request open, to synchronization, comments, labels.
Wow.
And so you can get pretty exact to when you want to take some sort of action and run some script.
Yeah, very cool. So what does the future look like for you? Would you still continue to use Probot? Would you use Actions? Would you have a mix?
So we started doing this before Actions was around, which is why we made the choices we did.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have a chance to evaluate Actions. I think if we started today, we would definitely consider Actions, but there are a few constraints. So Actions don't deal very well with long-running tasks, so that can be problematic. You also, it's also hard if we ever wanted to scale up. So we used a thing called Google Cloud Functions, which ultimately takes a small bit of Node.js or a few other languages, but in our case it's Node, and executes it for us on an event hook. It starts up a service when we need it and shuts it down, so it costs us very little money. And we could adapt that into Docker containers fairly straightforward and then maybe eventually we need a Kubernetes cluster, who knows. We've also extended to have some security measures. So we store none of the secrets in the functions themselves. They're all stored in a key management service, also a thing that Google Cloud provides, and allows us to be a little more secure and a little more confident. It's also a lot easier for us to rotate our secrets. And so for a convenience standpoint, it's pretty good for us.
Nice. So Jason, what does the future of Probot look like? Will it have some kind of maybe integration with Actions or some way of sharing like the capabilities between the two? How does that look?
That's a great question. First of all, who knows? We can sort of do our best guess, but what I'd love to see is some of the features of Actions sort of opened up to the ecosystem. So like the secrets thing I was talking about, that's specific to Actions, but I'd love to see it come to the general ecosystem so that Probot can use it and enable it for integrators that way.
Yeah, that'd solve a big problem.
Yeah, for sure. But otherwise, I mean, I still see them as separate. I still see them as two separate ways to build integrations. I personally have written a ton of GitHub Actions. I think they're wonderful. I've written a ton of Probot apps, and every time I go and build something new, I'm like, which one am I going to choose today? There are some ways to use a Probot app within Actions. There's a repository in the Probot org on GitHub, github.com/Probot. It's called, I want to say, Actions Adapter. And the premise is you wrap your Probot app in this like little Node adapter thing, you run it in Actions. So you can kind of have the best of both worlds. I mean, like I said, Probot's just Node, so you can make some adjustments and throw it into a GitHub action and call it a day. So,
And it really gives you that flexibility to really choose anything, whereas GitHub Actions are more kind of streamlined for GitHub. They're running on GitHub servers. This, like you're running yours on Google Cloud Functions, so you can have way more flexibility and make those more fine-grained decisions with Probot.
Yeah, I mean, I'd liken it to running your own server versus like throwing something on Heroku or it's just about control. Yeah,
very cool. Another cool thing that you showed off in your talk was a way to proxy the webhooks locally so that you can access those and test your Probot locally. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So I can talk about it, or I think Jason is a kind of an expert on SME.io.
I actually kind of want to hear you talk about it because I'm curious. I never get to hear people describe it to me.
Sure. So SME.io is a service that Jason's also pretty involved in that proxies, in our case, JSON payloads from GitHub to a local host. And so it's a rather simple service. Jason was telling me, I think it's hundreds of lines of code. It's at that level. And what it allows us to do is locally test our bots. So we don't need to get Google Cloud involved at all. We don't need to get Actions involved or anything. We can run the Express server locally. We can make a test repository on GitHub, and that will send the event to SME.io, and they give you a slug. So it ends up being a random character string. And that will forward to localhost 3000, and allow us to test it locally. You can debug things then that way. You can play around a bit. It doesn't have to be too serious then. It lets you experiment. The other really nice thing that SME.io does is it lets you see the requests that have been made, which I find very useful when it comes time to write integration tests, unit tests. I can look at a real JSON payload, and I can capture that, and I can use it again later. That I think is something I don't see a lot of examples of, but it's probably, for me personally, the most useful thing about SME.
Yeah, that's a nice way to get at that is very beneficial.
Yeah, I think we actually have an issue open in the web, like the server repo, that's like add screenshots of the JSON payload view, because it's super, super helpful.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, is there anything else that you want to tell us about Probot that we haven't heard about today?
I'd actually like to expand on how SME works on the inside, because there's like this sort of really interesting API that I'd never heard about before. It's called the Event Source API.
Event Source API.
Yeah, and it's kind of like I'm probably going to get this wrong, but it's like a unidirectional WebSocket implementation, kind of. Okay. And SME works by having this one server that's constantly running, and then multiple clients connect to it as, I want to say event source clients is the right term. But it's sort of this like, we have this, primary SME server that then shares payloads as they come in to all the different clients listening. So, we built it specifically for Probot apps to like receive webhook payloads locally. But, I've played around with like really weird implementations of it, using it to capture payloads from, all over the place to not just a Probot app, but, some running server or something. So, yeah, it's a weird thing that we've seen people use for completely different, intentions than we ever thought about.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool seeing it.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So that's like you said, there's a single server. That's a server that you're running, and then the clients would be like a server that Chris is running for.
Yeah, exactly. So there's like two separate parts to it. There's SME.io, and then there's the SME client. There's a CLI, or you can use it programmatically. So like there's some built-in support in Probot.
Okay.
But you can also just use the CLI directly.
Cool. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about Probot, and for sharing your wisdom on robots, and making me feel a little safer that we're not going to get to level 5 automation anytime soon, and that you're actively not doing that. So appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by Brave. We deserve a better internet. That's why the team behind Brave reimagined what a browser could be. Brave is like Chrome, the good parts. Even your extensions will just work. It has built-in ad and tracker blocking, easy anonymization with the Tor network, earn tokens while you browse, and use them to tip your favorite creators. And did I mention it's lightning fast? Turns out the web is super fast when you remove all the cruft. Download Brave today using the link in the show notes, and give tipping a try on changelog.com.
We have one more talk that we're going to do, and that is on Node.js worker threads. So I'd like to introduce Rich Trott and Anna Henningsen. If you'd please come up. Let's give them a round of applause. Why don't you introduce yourselves?
Okay. So I'm Anna. I work for Neoform, which is an Irish Node.js consulting company, and I work on Node.js. So my job is working on bleeding edge features for Node.js and other Node.js things.
Nice.
Yeah. So workers is one thing that I pushed quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. And workers, so I'm learning about the Node, like team internals, and does what working group does workers kind of fall under, or does it?
I mean, so it doesn't have its own working group. It is what we call a strategic initiative.
Okay.
And Rich can probably talk a lot more about what that exactly is than I do. But basically means there's somebody on the technical steering committee of Node.js who is in charge of like pushing that forward.
Nice.
Like who reports like what progress has been made and so on.
Yeah. Cool. And Rich, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Rich. I work at the UCSF, University of California in San Francisco library, where my Node.js work is tolerated, but is not my primary responsibility. So most of the work that happens inside Node.js, well, I don't know, depends how you quantify it, but a lot of the work that happens isn't in a strategic initiative and isn't in a working group. It's, there's no roadmap because the features that get implemented and the bugs that get fixed or whatever the people who are contributing and collaborating want to, take their time to fix and implement, and on a really, really wanted worker threads.
Yeah.
Very cool. So let's take a step back, actually, for a moment. And what even are worker threads?
Well, they are threads built on the worker model that is used in browsers.
Okay.
Like for a long, long time, browsers had this worker
like a service
class.
worker.
Yeah. No.
No, web workers.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, web worker. That's what I
not
meant.
service workers.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, like service workers are also a thing, but like a while ago, somebody came up to me and asked me like how do workers and service workers relate to each other, and I'm sorry, it's like completely different.
Right.
It's like Java and JavaScript.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I totally had my terminology mixed up. I met web workers.
So web workers are a way for like websites to offload CPU intensive work to a different thread, communicate with it, like send JavaScript data back and forth, and worker threads essentially brings that to Node.js.
Okay.
So you can like spawn multiple threads, like they're kind of like separate Node.js processes, except they are like in the same process, and they can share data very efficiently, especially if it's like typed array data that is, structured very easily serializable. And so, it's...
Yeah, I don't know if you saw my talk yesterday, but I totally evaded the subject of explaining what they were by saying they're kind of like web workers, but they have some differences, and I point out one difference, I think. And then they're kind of like threads in other programming languages, but not really. And then I just quickly moved on rather than actually try to clarify what kind of gray area they actually fall into. Just go look at the documentation and start using them. Don't worry about it.
Right. Don't worry about it. That's
don't worry about
actually
it.
good advice. Yeah.
I love it. Worker threads. Don't worry about it.
Just use the thing.
So not to get into semantics much about it, because I will get all of this wrong. But like when I think about like you have your main thread in like a JavaScript app or a Node app, and then like every time you do something asynchronous, that's kind of, is that considered like a thread or a process?
So that could offload to a thread in the pool that Node maintains under the hood. But no, it's not going to be a separate, it's not going to be a thread that you manage through this.
Like definitely not in a way that should be visible through the API.
Exactly.
Like you shouldn't think of it as a separate thread unless like.
You should think of it more in terms of like the event loop, right? Like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. So I know that like web workers have some constraints in like they, for example, can't access the DOM or things like that. Are there similar constraints? Obviously not to the DOM, but are there constraints to worker threads?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, like for the most part, no. For the most part, most Node.js libraries are available in built-in modules. Like you can use require, and it will work the same way as it does on the main thread.
Okay.
There are some restrictions that are around like managing per process state. Like for example, you can't change the process title or change the current working directory because we were thinking like, okay, this is something that it affects the entire process.
Right.
And so like that should ideally only happen on the main thread. But generally, no. There's like no restrictions on what workers can do, and that's one of the like very important ways in which they are different from web workers.
Yeah, there's like one or two things, or whatever, a small number of things in process dot or OS dot, I think, that they can't access. But for the most part, if you can do it in the main thread, you can do it in the worker thread. Worker threads can spawn worker threads. They can spawn additional worker threads. It can just be worker threads all the way down.
So what state are worker threads at right now? Like, are they something that I can use in production today?
Yes. Next question.
So in Node 10, they're still considered experimental.
Okay.
In Node 12, they are stable. And like there haven't been any like significant changes to the API over the last half a year, maybe a year or so. So they have effectively been stable for a while. Like the only few adjustments that we did before making it officially stable are some very weird edge cases around timing and the message transfer thing that, so in order to make it conform to the web platform test for that, you would never run into that as a regular Node developer. They've been stable for a while in a way.
Nice. Cool. So I can use them, as long as I'm in Node 12, I can use them today.
I guess you could also use them on Node 10, but little warning sign there.
In what can't you do with threads? And are there, like, with the other like experimental features, are there things like I'm specifically thinking? You said you can require in there. I assume ES modules would also work within threads.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What can't you do with them?
Well, I mean, like one thing is like workers are not there to replace like the existing multi-process model that most, or like at least a lot of Node.js applications use.
Mm-hmm.
Simply because it kind of makes things easier when you have different processes. In some ways, you can attach debuggers to them individually. With Node workers, that's it's kind of tricky. It works, but it's tricky, and like Chrome DevTools doesn't have support for that yet. And if like there's a hard crash for some reason, like the bug in Node or something, it won't tear the whole application down, just the single process that like was spawned by the parent.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't there to replace child processes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's kind of. I mean, every use case is different, I guess.
Yep.
I've been surprised a few times where mostly making example applications to sort of demonstrate worker threads, but I've been surprised a few times in both directions. Like, oh, this should really worker threads should have really performed a lot better here, and they didn't, or the other way around, where wow, that really made that take no time at all. So I mean, the API for worker threads is pretty small. The surface area, it's not a sprawling API. It's not a complicated API. It's the type of thing you can learn pretty quickly, and then I mean I find them it's just a lot of fun to just experiment with. So I mean my recommendation is go hog wild and just like see what and just benchmark everything and see what happens, and use them where they make sense and don't use them where they don't make sense. I mean the one thing Anna warns against in her blog post and is absolutely true is that if you can you're not going to get any benefit for IO heavy stuff with worker threads, because Node already does a lot with the asynchronous calls and like fs.read or whatever to fs.open, and so like trying to spawn worker threads to deal with massively concurrent IO is probably not going to get you anything.
Not going to help at all.
Right. So so that's something you can just not bother experimenting with unless you like seeing negative results, which some of us do. So
so what is there like a specific use case that worker threads were created to like be a solution for?
That is like CPU intensive work that ideally requires a lot of communication between the different threads, because that is usually going to be faster than communicating with child processes. Depending on how your data is structured, It's also a lot more flexible. Like you can send circular data or like generally things that don't fit into JSON over to threads. I think what Rich did in his talk is a very good example. Like for those who didn't see it, you want to explain, or I mean?
Yeah. So if you might recall the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon game, it was kind of like that before music, and so it was like. You have 2 musicians, and so you spawn 2 worker threads and have one thread try to find everybody who played with that musician, and the other worker thread do it for the other musician, and sends it back to the main thread, and the main thread just tells the worker threads to stop once they have a musician in common, which basically means you have a connection. But until that happens, both worker threads are just running. Gathering lists of people. Did that cover the part you wanted to cover?
Yeah,
okay.
Right. Basically. So like CPU intensive work that you want to offload from the main thread.
Yeah, because those are like really those queries get to be really expensive. At least the way I did them. So for me, like the exciting use cases are that so where I work, there's a lot of people who do or are interested in doing data science stuff, and they all want to use Python, which is a great language for that. JavaScript has been a terrible language for that, but between worker threads and recently also getting big int, we're not there yet, but it's getting pretty good for things like for machine learning and natural language processing and all that sort of stuff. The other thing I think about for worker threads is all those JavaScript packages that do graphics manipulation. Here's an NPM package that will create thumbnails for you or whatever. I think of graphics processing and that sort of thing as a CPU intensive thing, and why not fire off why not get a pool of 4 or 8 worker threads or however many processes however many make sense, and just launch them and have them do all of them at once, and bask in the glory of finishing your job faster.
Yep. Yeah, like image processing is a great example because it's also CPU intensive work, and like image data is usually represented in some way as like a U8 array or array of bytes, and so like you can transfer or share them with 0 cost with workers. And it's just like
I mean that's something we haven't mentioned yet, which is that unlike with cluster module where you have individual processes or anything where you have individual processes, workers you can share memory if it in certain situations, like if the data isn't if you know what size it is and if it's a very predictable format that you can put it in, you can share the memory, or you can even transfer the memory so that if you're the worker thread, I give you the shared array buffer and I can't use it anymore, but you can, and then which is really, really cool.
Nice. Yeah, I was just going to ask if it was like shared array buffer, if that's what you're using as the medium to transport between.
Yeah, shared array buffers are shared by default, and array buffers can be transferred. Like you can let go of ownership of them.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, how can people get started with worker threads, or where would you point them to get started with both using them and or contributing to them?
Well, let me tell you, Nick. So if you go to, I don't know if this will still be true for too much longer, but if you go to palacefamilysteakhouse.com, there will be a list of links from my talk, and the very first link is a blog post that Anna wrote using worker threads to solve Sudoku puzzles.
Nice.
And then there's a bunch of other things in there about my couple of blog posts from me and the documentation and some sample code and a few other things. As far as contributing to worker threads, my recommendation is know a lot about this is kind of a joke, but not really. Know a lot about Windows and debugging Windows and C++, and then clone the Node repository and fix test-worker-prof, because that one has been pretty stubborn.
That's going to be quite a journey if you want to do it.
But we're here to help. Well, and by we I mean Anna, because she knows the implementation. Yeah. I don't.
So for usually when you want to contribute, you want to have some visible result of that, and having I think the way that they are right now, workers as a feature are kind of complete. We can add stuff, and there's things that I want to work on, like startup performance, or there's this really cool thing that the JavaScript engine provides, which is called snapshotting. So you can basically take a node instance and take a snapshot of that, and then later deserialize it, which is kind of going to give you a very fast startup if you have boilerplate code that you run at the start of a thread or something like that. That would be really cool to have. It's going to be a ton of work. If somebody's interested, that's great. But you're going to have to read up a lot of V8 APIs with very poor documentation.
Yeah.
You ready?
No. Not at all, but that sounds amazing. Thank you for the very specific bug to go fix.
We know exactly where we struggle.
Right.
Yeah, it's been a terrible test for forever.
Well, cool. Anna, Rich, thank you so much for chatting with me today about worker threads, and thank you to all of the guests that we had on JS Party. Definitely check out the podcast at changelog.com/JSParty. I think that QR code should work. I tested it though, and it didn't. So, just because the screen's not bright enough. But yeah, definitely changelog.com/JSParty. Go there, check it out. And we record every Thursday at noon Central, 1 Eastern time. So check us out. Join the party. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you for tuning in to JS Party. We record live on Thursdays. Come hang with us. It's a lot of fun. We also take requests. What would you like to hear about on the pod? Holler at us at changelog.com/request. We're also on Twitter at JSPartyFM. We love chatting with listeners. If you haven't yet, upgrade to our master feed. Think of it like a mono repo for Changelog podcasts. Get this show, Practical AI, Brain Science, and everything we produce all in one place. You've got nothing to lose. Please do support our sponsors. They support us. Fastly, Rollbar, and Linode all have our back. Thanks to them. When we need music, we summon the Beat Freak, Breakmaster Cylinder. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.